There's currently a $1 trillion infrastructure bill making its way through the Senate after months of negotiations. Now, nothing's set in stone, even though there's a chance the bill will have passed once this video is posted, but let's take a look at what's currently in the bill and how black and brown communities stand to be affected by it. So in this bill, there's $110 billion earmarked to repair roads, bridges, and finance other major infrastructure projects. But I'm especially interested in the $1 billion set aside specifically to reconnect minority communities that have been divided by highways and other infrastructure. And if you're not familiar with some of these disconnected communities, let me give you an example. Let's take a look at how the highways in Brooklyn were placed carefully around the perimeter of the county, and if we look in Manhattan, we see the same type of careful planning. But now look at the Bronx, and you'll see how highways have carved up the landscape, completely disconnecting entire communities. And much of this was the doing of this man, Robert Moses, an urban planner who had no regard for the families he was displacing or the long-term economic and health impacts he would be imposing on Bronxites, effects that Bronx communities are still dealing with today, as the borough's the unhealthiest county in New York with some of the highest asthma rates in the country. So as the funding comes in for the planning, design, demolition, and reconstruction of our street grids, parks, and other infrastructure, we should be asking our political leaders, who exactly is in charge of facilitating these tasks, and are they reflective of our diverse communities and familiar with the historical plights of our neighborhoods? We've seen Congressman Richie Torres advocate to use some of the funding to transform sunken portions of the Cross Bronx Expressway into green space that would be built on caps placed over parts of the highway. Now, these are the types of tangible improvements we need to demand from the infrastructure bill. And one last thing I'll add on the topic of roads and bridges: can we get rid of these damn tolls connecting the Bronx and Queens? Why is it that if you're from the Bronx, you have to pay tolls to go into almost every other borough, but if you're traveling in between Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, you don't have to pay anything? If you want to open up more economic opportunities for Bronxites, get rid of these tolls on the Whitestone and Throgs Neck bridges. Besides the roads and bridges, the MTA, which operates New York's subway, bus, and commuter rail networks like the Metro North, stand to receive at least $10.7 billion in federal funding from this bill. Now, if you're from New York, you're familiar with the poor conditions that exist throughout the subway system. And the subway's old signaling system ensures that we always have delays and packed trains to look forward to. So hopefully this funding alleviates some of these issues and helps spruce up some of these rundown stations. Something else to keep an eye on is the MTA's plan to bring new Metro North stations to 4 areas in the Bronx. That's Hunts Point, Parkchester, Morris Park, and Co-op City, but it's unclear whether this infrastructure bill will help move these projects along. And ultimately, will current Bronx bus and subway commuters want to pay the higher fares charged by the Metro North? Remember, riders will have to pay twice when transferring from the Metro North to the subway at Penn Station, but as of right now, it does sound like a compelling option to have. Also, keep in mind that major transportation improvements like this tend to attract higher property values and ultimately gentrification, which often leads to the displacement of black and brown communities. Beyond transportation, the bill would provide a $65 billion investment in improving the nation's broadband infrastructure, with the goal of helping lower the price households pay for internet services by requiring certain internet providers offer a low-cost, affordable plan. It would also create a permanent federal program to help more low-income households access the internet. We all know how expensive internet is, but it's a necessity. How can you expect someone to maximize their productivity without having access to the internet? That's why it's critical that every public housing development in the NYCHA system and around the country has access to low or no cost internet. So there's plenty of infrastructure improvements in the bill, but there's even more that was left out of the bill. For instance, President Biden originally wanted almost $400 billion to improve our public housing, childcare facilities, schools, and community colleges, something that would significantly benefit minority communities. In New York, NYCHA alone is estimated to have $40 billion in outstanding capital needs to address the mold, peeling lead paint, old roofs, leaky pipes, and other issues. But truth be told, $40 billion isn't even enough, and here's why. If there are plans to rebuild in these black, brown, Hispanic, and Latino communities, then these buildings should be built by the same people who live in these communities, who could benefit from the well-paying jobs and health benefits produced by these massive projects. To make this happen, we need the funding to develop the local workforce in these communities so that when these billions come rolling in for construction, residents in NYCHA and other low-income communities are equipped with the technical and project managerial skills to perform the more advanced type of construction work that'll provide them with a real career in the industry. And I'm not talking about general labor positions. You know, construction jobs usually have a bad rep. It's often looked at as one of the only employment opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals, usually low paying with little job security. And to an extent, when it comes to working general labor in construction, it's true. And I know because I myself have worked as a general laborer for a GC and it sucked. But that's because I hadn't been trained in a specific trade like HVAC, like carpentry, like masonry, and I never went to school to be an engineer or project manager, which would have allowed me to earn more money. But these are exactly the types of trades and professional services that our black and brown communities need to be exposed to. We need more minority engineers, more architects, more project executives, and the talent is right there in our neighborhoods just waiting for us to develop it. And to President Biden's credit, his original proposal did have $100 billion for workforce development, which would have put students on a career path before they graduate high school. Now that's something I can rock with, but we need to take it a step further. We need to go beyond simply developing the workforce. We need to see more diversity at the ownership ranks of these construction firms, starting at the subcontracting levels all the way up to the general contracting and construction management levels. Why? Because we know that minority-owned firms tend to hire other minorities at a higher rate, which essentially addresses the whole workforce diversity issue organically. And once these projects are built, we need more minority-owned property management firms to ensure that there are long-term contracts available to keep these firms afloat during downturns in the market. Now, the only way we make this happen is if our government is providing funding to help small minority-owned construction firms build capacity and scale operations. You see, these firms need access to capital, they need adequate insurance and bonding, they need professional accounting services so they have solid financial books, they need help marketing their brand, and they definitely need help fleshing out their back office operations. So my hope is that we see some block grants going out to nonprofits that help minority-owned firms in these areas. Again, these infrastructure projects being built in our communities are for us and should be built by us. And I don't just mean that we're working these jobs as labor. We also have plenty of entrepreneurial talent with the technical skills and academic backgrounds to run their own firms. I'm tired of driving down a block in a primarily black or Latino community where there's some road work being done and the only person of color working that site is flagging or directing traffic. So we need to keep our political leaders accountable when it comes to awarding these contracts to construction firms. Now, although many measures were left out of the infrastructure bill, Democrats have also put forward a $3.5 trillion budget proposal that they intend to pass through a process known as budget reconciliation, which requires fewer votes than a regular bill needs. This budget is expected to contain some of the pieces that were left out of the infrastructure agreement, so don't be afraid to contact your local representative in Congress and let them know what your expectations are. So that's all I have. Please share, like, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. More content on the way.